In 1969, America was tearing itself apart. The Vietnam War had swallowed the country whole. Young men were being drafted by the tens of thousands. Television screens flickered with images of burning villages, body bags and helicopters vanishing into jungle smoke. Protesters filled the streets. Politicians promised victory. And somewhere in the middle of the chaos, working-class American boys were dying. Then came a song that sounded less like a protest anthem and more like an accusation. Fortunate Son by Creedence Clearwater Revival exploded onto the radio with raw guitar riffs and a voice that sounded furious, exhausted, and absolutely done with the lies. For decades, the song has been associated with Vietnam itself. It appears in war films, documentaries, and military montages so often that many people assume it's simply the Vietnam song, but that's not what Fortunate Son is really about. At its core, the song isn't about war. It's about class. It's about power. And it's about the people who never had to pay the price for the decisions they made. To understand the rage behind Fortunate Son, you have to understand America in the late 1960s. The Vietnam draft was supposedly random. In theory, every young man had an equal chance of being called to fight, but in reality, wealth and status created invisible escape routes. College deferments protected students from being drafted. Medical exemptions mysteriously appeared for the well-connected. Sons of politicians, businessmen, and elites often found ways to avoid combat entirely, while working-class families had no such protection. The burden of war fell disproportionately on poor Americans, and everybody knew it. One of the biggest sparks behind the song came from a highly publicized wedding in 1968. David Eisenhower married Julie Nixon in a ceremony that symbolized political royalty. To many Americans, it looked like the ruling class celebrating itself while ordinary citizens were being sent overseas to die. That image stuck with Creedence Clearwater Revival frontman John Fogerty, and out of that frustration came the opening lines, "It ain't me. It ain't me. I ain't no senator's son." Those lyrics cut straight to the heart of the hypocrisy. Fogerty wasn't criticizing patriotism. He wasn't attacking soldiers. He was exposing a system where sacrifice was expected from the powerless, while privilege shielded the elite. That's why the song feels so angry. Not sorrowful, not reflective, angry. Every verse points toward the same target: inherited power. The fortunate son is someone born into wealth, influence, and protection. Someone who waves the flag loudly but never risks anything personally. Someone who benefits from the image of patriotism while others carry its consequences. And the brilliance of the song is how direct it is. There are no metaphors hiding the message, no poetic ambiguity. Fogerty practically spits the words out with contempt. The music drives forward like a machine that can't stop, creating a sense of pressure and inevitability. The result feels less like entertainment and more like confrontation. Ironically, despite being one of the most famous anti-establishment songs ever recorded, Fortunate Son has often been misunderstood. Over the years, it became absorbed into pop culture as a generic Vietnam War anthem. Hollywood used it repeatedly in helicopter scenes and jungle combat sequences. The song became shorthand for America in Vietnam, but something important got lost in that transformation. The song was never glorifying war. It was condemning the inequality behind it, and that misunderstanding reveals something fascinating about how culture works. Sometimes a message becomes so iconic that people stop listening to the actual words. The sound survives, the meaning fades, yet the meaning of Fortunate Son has never really disappeared, because the resentment it describes still exists. The idea that ordinary people suffer while the powerful avoid consequences is timeless. Every generation recognizes some version of that imbalance. Different war, different politics, same feeling. That's why the song still resonates decades later. You can hear it in moments of economic frustration, in political distrust, in anger toward institutions that seem to protect insiders while demanding sacrifice from everyone else. Fortunate Son survives because it taps into something primal, the fury people feel when they realize the rules are not applied equally. And there's another layer that makes the song even more powerful. John Fogerty himself actually served in the military reserve. He understood the atmosphere of the time firsthand. But unlike many protest artists of the era, he never positioned himself as morally above soldiers. In fact, the song's sympathy is directed toward the very people sent to fight. That distinction matters. Fortunate Son does not mock the working class soldier, it defends him. The villain of the song is not the young man in uniform, it's the system that decides whose sons go to war and whose sons stay safe at home. That tension gave the song enormous emotional force. Working class listeners heard their own frustrations reflected back at them. Young Americans facing the draft heard someone finally saying the quiet part out loud, and radio stations couldn't ignore it. The song became a massive hit, not because it offered comfort, because it voiced anger people were already carrying inside themselves. More than 50 years later, Fortunate Son remains one of the sharpest political songs ever recorded, not because it explains policy, not because it offers solutions, but because it captures a feeling with brutal clarity. The feeling that power protects itself, the feeling that sacrifice is often demanded unevenly, and the feeling that patriotism can become a performance for people who never have to bleed for it. That's the real meaning of Fortunate Son, not simply Vietnam, not simply rebellion, but a furious rejection of privilege masquerading as patriotism. And perhaps that's why the song still hits as hard today as it did in 1969, because every generation eventually asks the same question: who pays the price and who gets to be the fortunate son?